Namaskar and a very warm welcome. You're watching Vantage. I'm Akanksha Swarup. Our top story tonight is the war in Ukraine. Russia has made a big move. It has started moving nukes to Belarus. The conflict is intensifying. Ukraine wants to counterattack, so Russia has decided to play the nuclear card. Its biggest leverage, also perhaps its last bargaining chip. What is Moscow's endgame here? Does it want a swift end to the conflict? We'll discuss. Also on the show, we could soon witness the climax of the US debt ceiling crisis. Biden says they are getting close to a deal, but experts are warning budget cuts could push the US economy into a recession. The former CEO of Google has warned artificial intelligence can take lives. And have you heard of boreout? If you feel bored at work and if you're just biding your time, this story is for you. I'm Akanksha Swarup, filling in for Palki Sharma. Let's have a quick look at the headlines first. Fierce fighting between rival forces continues in Darfur in Sudan. The violence threatens the already fragile one-week ceasefire. The war in Sudan has claimed over 1,500 lives and displaced more than 1 million people. German Chancellor says he plans to speak to Russian President in due course. Chancellor Scholz and President Putin last spoke via telephone in December. Tensions between the two countries have soared since the Ukraine war. Moscow is particularly angry with Berlin's decision to send heavy battle tanks to Ukraine. In India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government completes 9 years in power. On 26 May 2014, Prime Minister Modi took oath to become the country's 14th and current Prime Minister. He won a second term in 2019. General elections will be held in India next year. Twitter's top engineer quits. This comes just a day after the glitch-ridden launch of Ron DeSantis' 2024 presidential campaign on the social media platform. The Twitter app crashed for several users who had tuned in for the announcement. More than 80% of the firm's workforce has been cut since Musk took over in October last year. And British cycling bans transgender women from competing the female category. The decision follows a 9-month-long review. This bars rider Emily Bridges, Britain's high-profile transgender cyclist, from being part of the women's team. Russia is making bold moves near Ukraine. Moscow is finally resorting to its nuclear options. Tactical warheads are being moved to Belarus. The plan was announced back in March. So far, the Kremlin hadn't acted on it, but today it finally pulled the trigger. Russian nuclear weapons are going to Belarus.
The transfer of nuclear weapons has begun.
It has already begun.
Yes, it has already begun.
The weapons are already in Belarus.
Maybe. I'll take a look when I go back.
That was Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus and a loyal ally of Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko has kept his promise. His country is now playing host to Russian nukes. The West has denounced these deployments. What made Putin resort to nuclear weapons? What is the Russian president's endgame? Let's deep dive. The war in Ukraine is in its 15th month, and both sides are battling for every inch of territory. A counter-offensive by Ukraine could begin soon, which some say has already started. But Russia is preparing. Moscow is responding with nuclear weapons. The plan was announced back in March. Belarus said today the warheads are on the move. Who are these weapons for? Ukraine. That's a no-brainer. But there could be more targets. Look at the map. Belarus shares a border with 3 NATO members, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. So these countries too can be potential targets. What kind of warheads are these? Tactical warheads. They are small in size and they are used for a limited strike. So they won't be able to destroy big cities, but they can obliterate small areas. That's their purpose. The nukes in Belarus will be controlled by Russia. So no change in ownership. But if a nuclear strike is ordered, Belarus could execute it on Russia's orders. They were given missiles that can carry these warheads. Some aircraft have been converted too. Belarusian Sukhoi 25 will be able to carry nukes. The Sukhoi 25 is a Russian warplane. The Air Force of Belarus has them. In their fleet, Belarusian servicemen got some training too. So everything is in place. The question is, why now? The Russian defense minister has dropped some hints. He was in Minsk to finalize some specifics about this arrangement to store the nukes. Listen to his comments. The collective West is essentially waging an undeclared war against our countries. The West was doing all it could to prolong and escalate the armed conflict in Ukraine. Allow me to simplify that. Russia says the war in Ukraine has turned into a proxy battle and the West wants to extend the conflict by arming the Ukrainian forces. That's the allegation by Russia. So the nukes are deterrents, a way for Russia to take control and perhaps influence the outcome of this war. The US has called Russia's move irresponsible.
I would say that we strongly condemn the arrangement. As we have made clear, the use of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons in this conflict would be met with severe consequences.
Washington has condemned the move. But what are they doing to stop Moscow? Will it change its own nuclear posture? Will America reinforce its own nuclear deterrence? The answer to that question is a no. For now, the US has decided to do nothing.
We have not seen any reason to adjust our own nuclear posture. You've heard us say that before, nor any indications Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons for Belarus. Speaking to that particular issue, this is yet another example of making irresponsible and provocative choices. So we remain committed to collective defense of the NATO alliance, and I'll just leave it there.
So the US won't change its posture, but its ally, Japan, thinks differently. They are worried about Russia's nukes. Today, Tokyo announced fresh sanctions on Moscow. They condemned Russia's actions too.
We are aware of the announcement by both Russia and Belarus. As the only country to have suffered atomic bombings during wartime, Japan never accepts Russia's nuclear menace, let alone its use.
A nuclear menace. Japan is not mincing its words there. Expect this war of words to intensify. What about the actual war in Ukraine? Well, the fighting is escalating. Today, Russia targeted Kyiv again. More missiles and drones were launched towards Ukraine's capital. Ukraine said it shot down 10 missiles and 25 drones. There were no casualties. Russia is making moves in Crimea too. This week, Russian officials seized an apartment there. Guess who it belonged to? Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Reports say the property will be auctioned. But these small measures will hardly matter. Russian nukes are now not just near Ukraine, but they are close to NATO's borders too. For the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has deployed these bombs outside the country. It's a move that cannot be taken lightly. This war is about to enter a dangerous phase. But here's the bitter irony. China's peaceman has reached Russia. I'm talking about this man, Li Hui. Hui is China's special representative for Eurasia, but right now he's got a very specific job. Bring peace to Ukraine. Easy, right? China has already released a 12-point peace plan to end the war. Ironically, the document doesn't even mention the word war. It talks about the crisis in Ukraine. Either way, Li Hui has been busy. He kicked off his mission impossible in Kyiv. He then traveled to Warsaw, Paris, Berlin, even Brussels. Now he's in Moscow. What has China's peace envoy achieved so far? Virtually nothing. The fate of this peace mission was predetermined because China is not a neutral party. They have announced a no-limit partnership with Russia. Thus, they want to weaken the West. So China may not be fighting, but they have major stakes in this war, which is why Ukraine is wary of their plan. China's envoy met President Zelensky in Kyiv. The president's message was crystal clear. Don't ask us to give up land. Don't ask us to freeze the fighting. And what does China's peace plan say? It's got 12 points, but 2 of them stand out. One is ceasing hostilities. China wants both Russia and Ukraine to stop fighting. 2, resuming peace talks. Basically, finding a long-term plan to coexist. Let's assume both these demands are met. Let's assume the fighting ends today. Who does it benefit? Russia controls around 18% of Ukrainian territory. So if there is a ceasefire, Russian occupation will continue. Hence, Ukraine is wary. They have seen through China's plan, so have most European capitals. Poland told the Chinese envoy to not recognize territories annexed by Russia. They also warned Beijing against arming Moscow. France asked China to play a constructive role. They also promised to help Ukraine in the long term. And the European Union? Same thing. Brussels asked China to use its leverage to end the war. They said, use your influence. Ask Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. So Europe's message to China is twofold. One, we don't plan to abandon Ukraine. Two, China must try to pressure Putin, not just for a ceasefire, but for a complete withdrawal. Which brings us to present day. Moscow is likely to be the last stop on this peace train. It's familiar terrain for Li Hui. He spent 10 years in Moscow as China's ambassador to Russia. He knows the land and the people. Rumor is he also loves Russian literature. Li has also served as the Deputy Foreign Minister of China. He's dealt extensively with ex-Soviet states. My point is, he's not a lightweight. He is one of China's senior-most diplomats. So the idea behind sending him is clear: to tell the world that China is serious about its peace plan. If any Chinese diplomat can get the job done, it's Li. But he has very little to work with. You see, China's peace plan is inherently pro-Russia. There's no way Ukraine will agree to it. But here's what the peace mission can achieve: an image makeover for China. Remember Beijing's wolf warriors? They turned diplomacy into insulting, shouting contests. The result was counterproductive. It depicted China as snobbish, even aggressive. So now Xi Jinping is changing strategy. He wants to be seen as the global peacemaker. First, he proposed a plan for Ukraine. Then he brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And afterwards, he hinted at mediating between Israel and Palestine. The fact is, China doesn't want peace. It wants to create the perception of peacemaking because war suits their interest. Just think about it. If the fighting drags on, Russia becomes weaker, they will become more dependent on China, meaning Russia becomes a junior partner. Secondly, the West remains occupied. All their focus and money flows into Ukraine. Meanwhile, China is free to unleash chaos in the Indo-Pacific. The world must be wise to this plan. They must see it for what it is: a political stunt. Meanwhile, even as China publicly preaches peace, it seems like it's all prepared for war, using its standard tool, cyber espionage. A report by Microsoft says that critical US infrastructure has been compromised. It blames a state-backed Chinese hacker group dubbed Volt Typhoon. What has this group been doing? Not exactly the explosive activity their name would suggest. Instead, they've been playing the long game. Since at least 2021, Volt Typhoon has been infiltrating network systems across the US. They've been keeping a low profile, maintaining a discreet presence, almost as if lying in wait for the right time to strike. And their choice of targets is also of interest. Besides the US mainland, Volt Typhoon is infiltrating systems in the island of Guam. Our next report brings you the details.
It seems every other week, Chinese hackers are in the news. That too, state-sponsored Chinese hackers, Beijing's shady right hand. They have various nicknames in the intelligence community. We told you about backdoor diplomacy a few days ago and their activities in Kenya. Today, we'll talk about Volt Typhoon, China's sleeper cell of hackers. On Wednesday, Microsoft issued a warning. It found that Volt Typhoon had infiltrated critical US infrastructure. They'd been targeting every sector imaginable across the US, from standard ones like communications, government and transportation, to manufacturing, construction, and even education, basically covering all the bases. And where is Volt Typhoon embedding itself? All over the US and its Pacific Island territory of Guam. Guam is basically a US military colony in the Pacific Ocean. It's at this strategic location close to Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Its position makes it a hub for communication between the US and Asia and Australia. Guam is also within striking distance of Taiwan in case China decides to invade. So you can see why Beijing would have eyes on it. And according to Microsoft, Volt Typhoon is hacking Guam's infrastructure. This will be crucial in the event of an armed conflict. The hackers could use their access to disable communication at a critical moment. It could temporarily blind the US and its allies, creating a window for a Chinese lightning strike. Now, you may wonder, how has Volt Typhoon managed to infiltrate US infrastructure? Doesn't hacking usually mean a quick attack to steal valuable information? Well, Microsoft says the group is using what's called living off the land techniques. This isn't the usual method of targeting people to steal passwords for access. Instead, Volt Typhoon operates with stealth. It manually issues commands over the network, steals credentials from local systems, blends into normal network activity, and even uses open source tools to gain access. That's a lot of jargon. The basic point is this: Volt Typhoon works quietly and maintains access over a long period of time. It doesn't create any waves or leave any digital footprints behind. This makes it difficult to know exactly what it has access to. The only real solution is to change passwords or close accounts frequently. All this was revealed by Microsoft on Wednesday. It set off a flurry of activity in Western security establishments.
We are aware of recent activity by a People's Republic of China sponsored cyber actor to develop a presence in digital networks across the U.S. critical infrastructure sector. The U.S. government and close allies have released a joint cybersecurity advisory to help defenders identify and mitigate any such activity on their networks. And the U.S. intelligence community assesses that China almost certainly is capable of launching cyber attacks that could disrupt critical infrastructure services within the United States, including against oil and gas pipelines and rail systems.
Which nations are shoring up their defenses? The US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. In intelligence circles, they're sometimes collectively referred to as the Five Eyes Alliance. This group was actually formed during World War II and has persisted ever since. Yesterday, China sent a message to the Five Eyes.
Obviously, this is a collective disinformation operation initiated by the United States and mobilized by the Five Eyes countries out of geopolitical purposes. As we all know, the Five Eyes Alliance is the largest alliance organization in the world, and the US National Security Agency is the largest hacking organization in the world. The fact that they teamed up to publish a disinformation report is ironic in itself. As for the participation of certain companies at this time, it shows that in addition to government agencies, the United States is also expanding new channels for disseminating disinformation. This is not the first time, nor will it be the last.
China then went on to accuse the US of being a hacker empire. It cited an incident from last September, saying the US had tried to hack a Chinese university. That doesn't really prove China's innocence, though. It just makes it seem as though everyone's hacking everyone else, which could very well be the case. But this Microsoft report proves one thing, though. The US and the West need to improve their cybersecurity, or risk being a target for an information blackout on Beijing's command.
Biden's problems are compounding. The Chinese hackers are a menace. But the bigger worry is the debt ceiling crisis. It's like a ticking time bomb for America's economy. Next week, the American government could default. For weeks, Biden has been trying to convince Republicans he wants a new credit line to keep his government running. And it seems Biden may finally have a breakthrough.
Speaker McCarthy and I have had several productive conversations, and our staffs continue to meet as we speak, as a matter of fact, and they're making progress.
They're making progress. No deal yet, but the negotiations continue. Honestly, they don't have much time. America is literally on the brink of an economic catastrophe, a government default. It hasn't happened in America's history. Everyone is concerned, including the American armed forces.
I think there's no doubt whatsoever that there would be a very significant negative impact on the readiness, morale, and capabilities of the United States military if we defaulted.
A default cannot happen. They're speaking in loud and clear terms. That message is for America's politicians. The time for bickering is over. They need to act. And they seem to be hearing. A compromise solution is in the works. We have some specifics. Some reports have come out. They say America's debt ceiling could be raised for 2 years. The debt ceiling is the upper limit on government debt, so the Biden government will be able to borrow more, but they'll have to give up on some things, like spending on discretionary programs. This includes house and education schemes. There will be a cap on spending in these areas. What else? Some of the money will be redirected. More money will flow towards the military and veterans. We'll have to wait for the exact numbers. The agreement is still being hammered out. But if a deal is struck, this is what it could look like. So we could see an end to this impasse soon. Perhaps the US will narrowly avoid the default. However, the deadlock is already causing damage. America's credibility is taking a hit. Credit rating agencies have issued warnings they could downgrade America's debt. DBRS Morningstar has put the US under review. They could consider a downgrade. Other leading agencies like Fitch, Moody's and Scope have raised similar warnings. That's not all. Experts are worried. This political impasse could have more consequences. The US economy could enter a recession. The economists are worried about the spending cuts. They feel the curbs could last for multiple years. And if government spending is cut, the American economy will feel the impact. There could be a recession in 2024. There are warnings about jobs too. The spending cuts could lead to layoffs. Going by one estimate, as many as 570,000 jobs are at risk. The proposals by Republicans to limit spending can reduce America's GDP by 0.8% and boost unemployment by 0.4%. Those are the estimates. Again, this entirely depends on what kind of deal the Democrats and the Republicans agree upon. But compromises will be made. That's a guarantee. Guess who will bear the brunt for this? Joe Biden, the US president. The spending cuts will impact his domestic agenda. Biden has projected himself as the president for the middle class. He is called Middle Class Joe for the same reason. And he is running on the same platform for 2024. The budget curbs will affect his re-election chances. Biden knows that. He's trying to protect the middle class from the budget cuts.
But Speaker McCarthy and I have a very different view of who should bear the burden of additional efforts to get our fiscal house in order. I don't believe the whole burden should fall on the backs of middle class and working class Americans. My House Republican friends disagree.
So that's the disagreement. The stakes are high for Biden. The budget crisis can not only upend his re-election campaign, but also plunge America into a recession. The US may or may not enter a recession, but Germany has, at least on paper. Europe's largest economy reported another quarter of economic contraction. Experts are blaming household spending. Germans are not spending thanks to rising inflation and expensive credit. The result? Economic activity is down. But what does a German recession mean for Europe? And should India be wary as well? Our next report tells you all about it. Germany is in recession, but don't cue the poverty pictures yet, because this is a technical one. Here's how economists define a recession. 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, in other words, contraction. That's what Germany is going through. Let's look at the numbers. In the last quarter of 2022, growth was minus 0.5%, meaning the economy shrank. In the first quarter of 2023, growth was minus 0.3%. Again, the economy shrank. So technically, Germany has entered a recession. But what led to this? Experts are blaming the German people. Household spending was down 1.2% over the same period. If people don't spend, economic activity falls. Explanation time. Russia's invasion has increased energy prices across Europe. The result? Rising cost of living. Germany's inflation average for 2022 was 7.9%. It was the highest since World War II. In 2021, the average was just 3.1%. The high prices drained household savings. People bought only what they needed, not what they wanted. The government did the same. Public spending was down 5% in the last 2 quarters. Put together, they dragged the German economy down. The question is, what next? A persistent recession means trouble. We may have to cue the poverty pictures. So all eyes will be on the second half of 2023. If the GDP improves, it's good news. If not, you get the idea. Germany's fate is also linked to the world. It is the largest economy in Europe, also the 4th largest in the world. Around 32% of their GDP is made up of exports. The problem is, the world isn't buying. Economic recovery in the US and China has been sketchy. German car export to China has fallen 24%. If that continues, the economy will struggle. But on Thursday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz appeared confident. He said the prospects are very good.
The German economy's prospects are very good. We are solving the challenges we face. You know, we have full employment. There is a public debate around a shortage of workers in Germany, and in fact, we have a big demand for skilled workers. To solve the problem and these challenges, we have now implemented as legislation the Skilled Workers Immigration Act.
There is good and bad news for Germany. First, the good news. Inflation seems to be easing off. Natural gas prices are also returning to 2021 levels. So consumer spending should rebound. The bad news is the gloomy global economy. Unless China and the US recover, German exports will not pick up. To be fair, there were enough warnings. Most of late 2022 was spent predicting recessions. Now, Germany has fallen victim. The question is, who will be next? Bloomberg says Britain is a prime candidate. It was given a 75% probability. So is the United States. It had a probability of 65%. And what about India? Bloomberg gave India a 0% probability, which is good. But the ripples from Germany will reach India. Germany is India's largest trading partner in Europe. Total trade is worth almost $20 billion. India exports clothes, smartphones, and leather products to Germany. The exports are worth almost $10 billion, but traders are expecting trouble. The recession could hurt India's sales to Germany, especially common use exports like clothes and phones. How big will the hit be? According to one Indian exporter, $2 billion. That's globalization for you. We grow together, but we also fall together. It's round 2 in Türkiye. The presidential runoff is scheduled for Sunday, and it promises to be a consequential vote. First, the basics. 2 candidates are on the ballot, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. The first round ended in stalemate after neither candidate crossed 50%. So now it's time for round 2. The question is, who has the edge? From the looks of it, Erdogan. The opinion polls were expecting him to do badly, but he ended up polling 49.5%, just short of winning the whole thing. Plus, he has a new supporter, Sinan Oğan. He's a far-right candidate who came third in the first round. He polled around 5%. Earlier this week, he endorsed Erdogan. So the odds are stacked in the president's favor. Where does that leave Kılıçdaroğlu? His campaign strategy was starkly different from Erdogan. He talked about human rights, secularism and democracy. Not anymore. After the first round, he changed tack. He began appealing to Turkish nationalists. How? With a lot of refugee propaganda. Listen to this.
I declare it to all compatriots. I never sit on a table with terrorist organizations, and I never will. Period. I announce it to you here. I will send all the refugees home as soon as I come to power. Period.
They call him Turkish Gandhi, by the way. After that speech, I'm not so sure. Either way, the rhetoric seems to be working. Türkiye's Victory Party has endorsed Kılıçdaroğlu. It is an ultra-nationalist party. Their platform is based on sending back Syrian refugees. So some good news for Kılıçdaroğlu. But will it be enough? Erdogan's strategy for the second round has been different. Fewer rallies, fewer rants. He's focused more on consolidating his lead. He's also visited some areas struck by the earthquake in February. Erdogan enjoys the benefit of being in power. He can control the narrative using government machinery. Just look at social media. Twitter has begun restricting certain tweets in Türkiye. Why? Reports say the government is asking them to. In 2020, Erdogan passed a new media law. It requires social media platforms to censor content if the government says so. If not, there will be legal action. Many users say they are unable to view certain tweets. No guesses who these tweets criticized. The vote on Sunday promises to be fiercely contested and consequential. I know Erdogan holds the edge, but stranger things have happened in politics. A lot depends on the Kurdish vote. Some quick background here. Kurds are the largest ethnic minority in Türkiye. They make up around 15 to 20% of the population. Most of them live in the east. Erdogan has made a career out of villainizing Kurds. He calls them terrorists, even separatists. But Kilic Darulu is counting on their support.
Erdogan is never an option for us. The only option is to replace him and the power he stands for. Therefore, we state once again that it is extremely important and a priority for us to recognize the expectation and desire of the Kurdish people and Turkish society as a whole for democracy, law, justice, equality and freedom, and the democratic will at the ballot box.
But what would an Erdogan victory look like? Normally, re-election means status quo, a continuation of current policy. But in Türkiye, it's not that simple, because Erdogan is a disruptor in Turkish politics. He's turning a secular nation into his Islamist vision. So if he wins on Sunday, here's what you can expect. More support for Islamist ideology, more persecution of Kurds, also more illogical economic policies. Let me explain. Turkish inflation is at 44%. Other countries increase interest rates to tackle inflation, but not Erdogan. He decided to cut interest rates. Why? Because the concept of high interest is banned in Islam. Such policies have resulted in many hardships for the people. Yet, his support is strong. As they say, he is a Teflon leader, but the biggest impact would be on foreign policy. Western countries would have been hoping for an Erdogan loss. His opponent is a firm supporter of NATO. He has also promised to restart talks to join the European Union. If Erdogan wins, all of that goes out of the window. He will continue to build ties with Russia. He will also remain a shaky NATO ally. India too will be watching the results closely. Erdogan has been no friend of India's. He has sided with Pakistan consistently, even raked up Kashmir at the United Nations. So along with Turks, the whole world will be waiting for Sunday's results. About a decade ago, Stephen Hawking said something apocalyptic. He's one of the world's leading scientists, and he said that the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. At that time, this statement rocked the world. Why won't it? His words spoke to our worst fears. Will AI destroy our world? Will armored robots govern us? Will humans go in hiding and live inside underground bunkers? Sounds ominous, but many of us have these questions. And Hawking is not the only person to highlight them. And now, the ex-CEO of Google is echoing this warning. His name is Eric Schmidt. He says that AI poses an existential threat and that it could kill many, many people. Should we be scared? Here's a report. People are quite bad at predicting the future. It's 2023. Where is our vacation on Mars? Our flying cars? Our robot butlers? But humans aren't just bad at assuming what's to come. We also incorrectly assure ourselves about the future. For example, in the 1970s, computer pioneers like Ken Olsen said that they didn't foresee people having any use of computers in their home. And yet, today we live in a computer-filled world. These computers have advanced by leaps and bounds. And now they have a new tech, artificial intelligence, which is taking over the world. It is seen as a boon for humanity. We are continuously developing it, mining for endless benefits. But are we again suffering from faulty predictions? Are we underestimating the harm AI could bring to us? If yes, what is the extent of this harm? Could AI cause our extinction? At least Eric Schmidt says so. He is the former CEO of Google. And he has warned that AI poses an existential risk. He says it could kill or harm many, many people, and that this technology could be misused by who Schmidt calls the evil people. But he's not alone in highlighting the risks of AI. AI anxiety is on the rise, and it has increased dramatically in recent months. Several high-profile tech figures have issued warnings. This includes Sam Altman, the CEO of ChatGPT's parent company, Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, and Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple. The world seems to be afraid. For many, the fears are rooted in present, like the spread of misinformation or the loss of jobs, or even cases of AI sexually harassing people and spewing racist nonsense. After all, AI is trained on information off the internet. Then there are existential fears, the threat of the world being overrun by AI, which is fast moving from science fiction into the mainstream. According to a survey of experts, there's a 50% chance that AI will reach human-level intelligence by 2050 and 90% chance of reaching it by 2075. The world is also working towards artificial superintelligence, a domain of intelligence where AI doesn't only perform as well as humans, but far exceeds our best abilities. There are at least 72 such projects around the world. The success of even one such project would be a massive deal. Experts say it would be the most significant event in human history. Our species would be joined by something more intelligent than us. The benefits of this would be nothing short of a blessing. It could help cure cancer or even undo global warming. But if we are thinking about the best, we must also think about the worst. And our worst fears could actually come true. Yet, what are tech giants doing about it? Nothing. They continue to invest millions in AI. They want to move fast and break things. They aren't slowing down. But even if they aren't, shouldn't our governments do something about it? Unfortunately, they're still playing catch-up with AI. The tech advancements are racing forward, while policymakers are still dithering, unable to take action. And AI is flourishing in a perfect storm of unreliability, irresponsibility, vast usage, and a clear lack of regulations. Fact is that the world is skeptical about AI, and rightly so. AI hasn't won our trust yet, and the fear is it could be our nightmare, dressed like a daydream. Now let's focus on something else that kills people: disease. Specifically, let's talk about what's concerning the World Health Organization. Disease X, the next pandemic. This isn't a specific disease. It's a warning about the future. The WHO says that another pandemic will definitely come. Disease X, whatever it is, may be worse than the Wuhan virus. And the world needs to be prepared. And the WHO is right, because this disease X may not be too far away. In fact, it may be closer and more familiar to us than expected. Earlier this month, the WHO had declared that the Wuhan virus was no longer a public health emergency, but it had warned people not to become complacent. It was still out there, mutating, biding its time. It had the potential to strike back. So could it be that the Wuhan virus has actually returned as the dreaded disease X? Because the cases are rising again. Back where it all began, China. A report.
The annual World Health Assembly is taking place in Geneva. It comes just weeks after the World Health Organization said the Wuhan virus is no longer a public health emergency. That was earlier this month. But at the time, the WHO warned the world not to become complacent.
The worst thing any country could do now is to use this news as a reason to let down its guard, to dismantle the systems it has built, or to send the message to its people that COVID-19 is nothing to worry about.
This week, the WHO issued another warning. It told the world not to delay the reforms needed to prepare for the next pandemic.
We cannot kick this can down the road. If we do not make the changes that must be made, then who will? And if we do not make them now, And when? When the next pandemic comes knocking, and it will, we must be ready to answer decisively, collectively, and equitably.
He said, when the next pandemic comes knocking, and it will. There's no doubt. The WHO has come up with a designation for the future pathogen, Disease X. We don't know what it is exactly, where it comes from, where it will strike, but Disease X will cause the next pandemic. And it will be even deadlier than the Wuhan virus. It doesn't seem to be on the WHO's radar yet. The agency released this list of priorities. As you can see, Disease X comes in at number 9. That basically means that even though we don't know what it is, the WHO is keeping its eyes open, watching out for any indication that Disease X has arrived. Of course, that may just be too optimistic from the WHO, because Disease X may not be something entirely new. We say this because the Wuhan virus has mutated again, and cases are on the rise. The Wuhan virus is once again going rampant in China. Estimates say that by the end of June, China will see as many as 65 million cases per week. This figure was quoted by the country's top respiratory disease expert, Zhong Nanshan. In fact, he said that infections could hit 40 million a week right now. The variant behind the rise is the XBB. It's another of the endless Omicron subvariants. Chinese state media says XBB has led to 80% of the new infections in China. China's National Health Commission says XBB has greater transmissibility and immune escape than earlier strains of Omicron. The country even recently approved 2 new vaccines targeting XBB. Despite this, China says there's nothing to worry about. State mouthpiece Global Times released this report today. It says there will be limited impact, but believe China at your own risk. The US Department of Health quite clearly doesn't. Its National Institutes of Health, or NIH, released this report yesterday. It says about 10% of those analyzed experienced long-term symptoms or long COVID after 6 months. These were all Omicron patients. So, even though the pandemic is over, the danger hasn't passed. Not while the Wuhan virus continues to mutate. It's not certain that the WHO's dreaded Disease X will be a variant of the Wuhan virus, but there's no guarantee that it won't be. China needs to stop underplaying the problem and work with the world. The last thing we need is the dragon releasing yet another pandemic.
Now, we all know what burnout is. It involves long working hours, poor work-life balance, and even the glamorization of overwork. Burnout takes a toll on our bodies, and we know that it's bad for us. But have you ever heard of boreout? This word doesn't get as much attention as its workaholic cousin, burnout. But it's just as evil. Simply put, boreout refers to chronic boredom. It's normal for everyone to get bored at work occasionally, but being chronically bored for days on end may indicate a bigger problem. Boreout is when your job feels pointless and tasks seem to be devoid of value. There's a little bit of working and a lot of staring at the ceiling. There's maybe a little nap here and a lot of coffee chugging there. Maybe even online shopping and holiday planning. All while being at work, simply to pass time. Basically, you witness the slow death of your job, and it can be disheartening. You ask yourself, how did I get here? Well, there could be a number of factors. Maybe your physical workplace environment is demoralizing, or your job doesn't challenge you enough. Maybe the project you were hired for is no longer a priority. It could also be that you shouldn't have been hired in the first place, or that you were brought on board a little too soon. All in all, boreout is about people not having enough work to do. It is seen as jobless employment. And it is different for different people. Maybe someone is lazy and secretly enjoys chilling at work. Maybe someone wants to do more but doesn't know how to tell their manager that they are effectively jobless. So there are variations. But experts say the fundamental experience of boreout is its meaninglessness. It's when work doesn't really have a purpose, and boreout can seem like just a buzzword or even a laughing matter. But experts say it is just as pernicious as burnout because boredom at work is a real issue. It is present across industries. It is bad for both workers and companies. Disengaged employees cost employers an additional 34% of their salary. Through absenteeism and lost productivity, studies say chronic boredom increases employee turnover, early retirement intentions, even poor health and stress symptoms because people who suffer from boreout often suffer from depression, high rates of anxiety, even physical ailments like headaches and insomnia. The worst part is while in burnout, the consequences are drastic and quite physical, like a worker collapsing from exhaustion. The symptoms of boreout are more mental and emotional. Employees seem physically present, but they are absent in spirit. So boreout stays hidden from plain sight, and it can go on for a while. It can also be seen as a worker lacking interest or motivation, which is an organizational taboo. But at this point, you must be wondering, if it's so bad, why don't employees just talk about it? Because talking about boredom is also taboo. Experts say employees feel like they will have a target on their back. How does one tell their manager they are earning a salary for barely doing anything? Especially when layoffs have become a daily sport. There is a clear risk of things going south. Tackling boreout can surely be tricky, but it is time that we start by recognizing it and talk about it because boreout invites long-term harm, both financial and emotional. And waiting for things to improve can result in years of just that, agonizing wait. And we should remember one thing, boreout is not just an employee-centric problem. Managers need to take responsibility too. They need to actively seek signs of boredom at workplace and find ways to mend things. This can include making minor changes to tasks or even job profiles and creating a workplace environment where workers feel valued. It's true that work can't always be exciting. It is unrealistic to pretend that it will be. But just as burnout is seen as the enemy of employee well-being, so should chronic boredom. And we aren't supporting the so-called hustle culture. Idleness can be good, but just how much and for how long? Burnout and boreout are extreme ends of the same spectrum, and they both need our attention because being terribly bored is a crisis. It's a crisis of growth and a crisis of meaning, and it is looming large, all while workers are reaching the end of their rope. Except now, they aren't burnt out, they are just bored. And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. A South Korean plane's door opened during a flight. It landed safely. Hundreds of people took to the streets of Bolivia to demand action on sexual abuse allegations that have rocked the country's Catholic Church. A 76-year-old man in India's Kerala narrowly escaped disaster after his mobile phone, kept in his shirt pocket, burst and caught fire spontaneously. And speaking of India, the country is all set to inaugurate its new parliament. The ceremony will take place on Sunday. The images have been released. And now let's take you back in history to the year 1940. What happened today on May 26th? This day witnessed one of UK's most heroic episodes in the Second World War. Britain began a huge seaborne evacuation, an escape from a potentially disastrous defeat at the hands of Hitler's army. Over 300,000 British and French soldiers were evacuated. We're leaving you with these images. Thank you so much for watching. Have a happy weekend.
Dog-tired, hungry, but their spirit was never broken. Their ranks were solid to the end. Earned themselves a new name, the Unbreakable by rail in Britain. Tired, but there was a non-stop buffet all ready for them by the most terrible battle of all time. No, you can't beat a nation that breeds men like...
you.